I used to think my father was weak. He'd sit at the dinner table while my mother recounted some injustice from her day, someone cutting her off in traffic, a coworker taking credit for her idea, and he'd just listen. He'd nod. He'd ask questions. And then, when she was done, he'd sometimes say nothing at all, just reach across and squeeze her hand. I remember thinking, as a teenager full of certainty and testosterone, say something, defend her, get angry. I thought silence was the same as passivity. I thought listening was what you did when you didn't have anything important to contribute. Welcome to Living on a Prayer. I'm glad you're here. Today we're sitting with James 1:19 through 20. And we're calling this one Slow to Speak, Quick to Listen. And I need to tell you up front, I had this passage completely backward for most of my life. I thought it was about being nice, about keeping the peace, about biting your tongue so you don't make things worse. It's not. It's about something far more difficult, far more powerful, and if I'm honest, far more frightening than simple niceness. The comfortable lie I told myself, the one our culture tells us every single day, is that the person who speaks first, speaks loudest, or speaks most convincingly wins. We live in a world that rewards quick responses, the perfect comeback, the devastating tweet, the ability to think on your feet and dominate a conversation. Go into any job interview and they'll tell you to prepare your elevator pitch. 30 seconds to sell yourself before the other person loses interest. We've built an entire economy around the idea that attention is currency, and whoever captures it fastest wins. And look, I bought into this completely. In college, I was that guy in seminars who'd jump in with an answer before the professor finished the question. I thought I was demonstrating intelligence, engagement. I thought silence was the sound of having nothing to offer. I'd go into arguments with my girlfriend, now my wife, with my points preloaded, just waiting for her to take a breath so I could deploy them. I wasn't listening to understand, I was listening to respond, listening to win. And the thing is, it worked, sort of. I won debates. I impressed people in meetings. I got laughs with quick wit. But I also lost something I didn't even know I was losing. I lost the ability to be changed by other people. Every conversation became a performance, a transaction, a competition. I'd walk away feeling victorious and somehow emptier. My wife started sharing less with me, not because I was cruel, but because she could feel that I was waiting for my turn rather than receiving her words. My friendships stayed surface level because I was always angling for the clever response instead of the honest one. I was living in an echo chamber of my own voice, and I'd built it so gradually I didn't even notice. This is what James is confronting head-on. He's not writing to people who don't talk enough. He's writing to people who talk too much, too fast, too confidently. People like me. Here's what the text actually says. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And the first thing that shattered my understanding of this passage was realizing the order. It's not be slow to get angry, and by the way, maybe talk less. The anger is the consequence. It's what happens when we get the first two backwards. When we're quick to speak and slow to listen, anger is the inevitable result. Not always loud anger, sometimes it's cold anger, dismissive anger. The anger of knowing you're right and the other person just doesn't get it. The anger of frustration when people won't simply accept your obvious truth. I started noticing this pattern everywhere. The comment sections online. People who clearly hadn't read past the headline. Fingers already flying with outrage. Family dinners where someone's waiting for a pause in the conversation like a sprinter waiting for the starting gun. Staff meetings where the loudest voice steamrolls the thoughtful one. But here's where it got uncomfortable for me. I started realizing that my quickness to speak wasn't a sign of intelligence or passion. It was a sign of fear. Fear that if I didn't establish my position immediately, I'd lose control of the narrative. Fear that silence meant I didn't have value to add. Fear that if I really listened, really listened, openly, without preparing my rebuttal, I might hear something that would require me to change. And change is terrifying. It means admitting you were wrong. It means the discomfort of holding two competing ideas in your head simultaneously. It means you might have to apologize, adjust, grow. Speaking quickly is a form of self-protection. It's armor. You can't be challenged if you're always on offense. You can't be changed if you never stop talking long enough to absorb someone else's reality. James knows this. He's watched communities tear themselves apart because everyone wanted to be heard and no one wanted to listen. The middle space was brutal. You know what happens when you start actually trying to listen first? You feel stupid. Someone says something you disagree with, and instead of immediately correcting them, you wait. You ask a question. Help me understand what you mean by that. And in that gap, that horrible gap of silence, your brain is screaming at you. Say something. They're going to think you agree with them. They're going to think you're weak. I'd sit in conversations feeling like I was physically restraining myself. Like there was a version of me pounding on the glass trying to get out and set the record straight. My wife noticed the change before I did. We were having one of our recurring arguments about household responsibilities. One of those fights where you both know your lines because you've performed this play 100 times, and I stopped. Mid-sentence, I actually stopped. I said, "I'm not listening to you. I'm waiting to make my point. Can we start over?" And the look on her face, it was like I'd suggested we sell everything and move to Montana. Confusion, suspicion, and then something that broke my heart. Hope. Here's what I didn't expect. Listening is not passive. It's the most active thing you can do. When you really listen, when you're quick to listen, as James puts it, you're not just receiving words, you're trying to understand the story behind the words. The fear, the history, the longing. You're granting the other person the dignity of being a full human being, not just an obstacle to your agenda. And this costs something. It costs your certainty. It costs your need to be right. It costs the adrenaline rush of winning an argument. What I found on the other side was something I didn't even know I was missing. Connection. Real connection. Not the shallow agreement of people who think alike, but the deep solidarity of people who've been truly seen and heard by each other. My father wasn't weak. He was doing the hardest thing a human can do. He was setting aside his own need to fix, to solve, to speak, and instead creating space for my mother to be fully herself. He was refusing to let his anger, even righteous anger at injustice, override his commitment to understand first, because that's what James is really after. Human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. It doesn't produce justice. It doesn't produce peace. It doesn't produce transformation. What it produces is more anger, escalation, division, a world where everyone's yelling and no one's listening. But when you're quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, you create space for something else. You create space for God to work, for truth to emerge, for reconciliation to become possible. This plays out in the smallest moments. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and instead of immediately laying on the horn and inventing their entire moral biography in your head, typical entitled driver, probably late because they can't manage their time, you pause. You breathe. Maybe they're rushing to the hospital. Maybe they're having the worst day of their life. Maybe they're just human and made a mistake, like you did yesterday. You don't have to know their story to grant them the dignity of having one. That's being slow to speak, slow to anger. It creates room for empathy where there was only judgment. In your closest relationships, this is revolutionary. What if the next time someone you love says something that triggers you, that activates all your defenses and rehearsed speeches, you got curious instead of combative? Tell me more about that. Help me see what you're seeing. Not as a tactic, not as a way to appear reasonable while you plan your counterstrike, but as a genuine posture of humility. The belief that you might not have the full picture, that their perspective might contain truth you need, that God might be trying to teach you something through their words if you'd shut up long enough to hear it. This doesn't mean you never speak. It doesn't mean you have no convictions. It means you hold your convictions with open hands instead of clenched fists. It means you speak from a place of understanding rather than assumption. And when you do speak, your words carry weight because they've been earned, because people know you've actually listened, because you're responding to what was actually said, not to the straw man you constructed in your head. The invitation today is simply this. Notice your next conversation. Notice whether you're listening to understand or listening to respond. Notice the physical sensation of wanting to jump in, to correct, to contribute. And just once today, don't. Ask a follow-up question instead. Let there be silence. Grant someone the gift of your full attention without the expectation that they need to hear from you in return. See what happens. See who you become when you're not the center of every conversation. See what you learn when you stop teaching long enough to be taught. Let's pray. God, you gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we've spent our lives defying that ratio. Forgive us for the times we've valued being heard over hearing, for the relationships we've damaged with our quickness to speak and our slowness to listen. Give us the courage to be quiet, the humility to be curious, the strength to set aside our need to win in favor of the harder work of understanding. Help us produce your righteousness in this world, not through our anger, but through our presence, through our willingness to truly see and hear each other. We ask this knowing it will cost us our certainty, and trusting that what we gain is infinitely more valuable. Amen. Before you go, if this resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider joining us daily for these 10 minutes of respite. Until next time, friends, may God's grace and peace be with you.